going to speak a little bit today about some of the activities with AI, generative AI, that we're doing in Australia. I'm a founder of a aged care advisory firm that also now provides SaaS platforms to the Australian aged care assisted living industry, as well as home care. We also have some private hospitals, and also some of our clients run daycare facilities and centers. And the topic and really our mission is to make aged care better and healthcare better as an organization. And our story really started in the Midwest. Came out from originally Ohio, but Ohioans go to Chicago because it's the big smoke, and joined with IBM, a division called SPSS, which was a statistical group, and really saw right from the get-go as a young grad a project with a bright statistician named Paul DiPodesto and a baseball manager named Billy Bean. And they were doing some amazing things with data with a club called the Oakland Athletics, which many of you may know as the Moneyball story. So as a young and personal grad right out of university, seeing how data transformed the club and enabled them to see value in players was just amazing. And it was something that stuck with me and still does to this day. And really, at Mirus, data is core to our mission. And what we do with that data is really changing literally by the year. And with the evolution of AI, it has really gone into almost a hyperspeed. And I'll tell you a little bit of the stories that we're working on and the use cases around how AI is augmenting a lot of tasks within Australian nursing homes in our industry. But our reach is quite wide. We are a country of distance, as you can see, landmass of near the United States of America, but the population of the state of Illinois. So that creates its own challenges to get around and to get to different homes and hospitals and private health services. But we represent over 170 different healthcare facilities organizations across the country. And as I noted, those include private hospitals, mainly the residential aged care sector. We have a funding platform where we're the largest data set outside of Australian Medicare. That has about $8.2 billion of funding that goes through every night. And our clients use that data to effectively manage the workflow. We have one payer in our country, socialized medicine, and that is Medicare, our Medicare. And effectively, it does make things quite simple, but also it comes with a different set of challenges than the US market. We represent over 90,000 residents in Australia that are a lot of our clients service and are funded from Medicare. And our government also pays for the accommodation of those residents as well if they are deemed to have low means, or what they call concessional. And there's a very complex framework of different divisions and systems talking to each other to determine if families or individuals have assets and means classifications that then inform Medicare not to pay all of those rebates back to the families. And then we have lifetime caps, and it's a very complicated entitlement system, and one that we use data and a visualization of data to help the RNs, the nurses that really run these businesses across the country, to understand and really simplify the complexities of this entitlement system. And in Australia, we've had some change with the legislation where they went through a significant reform agenda and brought more accountability funding through mandating care time to the dollars in a case mix model. So we have a rostering platform that also hooks up to our Medicare data set and informs the providers of the different case mixes that are changing. And effectively, think about it, every home has a different speed limit, and that speed limit is being dictated by the distribution of acuity of the residents that are in situ in that facility. And so that makes rostering a bit hard, because you can't just take a master roster and just hit refresh every fortnight and fill it with staff. You either go into overspend periods, or we now have an accountability system where if you're under-resourcing, the government can see that, and they can send auditors and do what they call unannounced visits, which will and can lead to effectively what they call sanctions, where they will either shut the home down or impose penalties, and the home has to hire in consultants to fix the problems and then show that the government that they're on top of the issues that is happening. So in our system, we roster around 29,000 staff every day across the country, and our clients love that system because it gives them not only just the rostering functionality, but also live award interpretation. So before they make the decision of filling a shift, they can actually see of all the people that are available on that pattern, what their costs are before they make that decision. And that's very important for the cost management and the managing budgets of these homes, because they're not much profit in them. And also within our country, about 55% of the sector is run by not-for-profits, church and charitables, Baptist Cares, Anglicares, and so forth. We do have private operators. I think they have a bit of a harder game to play because they also have to pay higher levels of tax and can't do package salaries and other type of not-for-profit incentives that the others can do. So our bound to clients is quite represented, about 50-50, but certainly the private operators have to really be on their A game every day with the information that they see and every decision that they make. And the pain points, though, that we're going through, we had effectively a spotlight in the media for about 3 years, sort of like 60 Minutes was equivalent. We had a Four Corners investigative journalism segment on really the systemic issues that were coming up with families and residents in nursing homes across the country. And of course, as technology has increased, and with videos and phones now just everywhere, a lot of videos are getting out there, and it really moved the country to do something about this. And our Prime Minister ordered a royal commission into the safety and quality of the consumers within our healthcare system. And the royal commission is effectively I think it was about a 2.5-year hearing. And there were individuals, consultants, organizations, everyone submits papers, interviews to really get to the bottom of the two commissioners that were overseeing it. And they came up with 137 recommendations that the industry needed to adopt in a very aggressive reform timeline. And we are still in the middle of that timeline. That mechanism of the funding in time was a way of holding these providers more accountable to the funding that they receive from government and having to evidence that going straight into the rosters of direct care personnel. And that agenda is still playing out, but it is really stretching providers in their capacity to do anything else. And it's a little bit of a hint of how AI is coming into the story. But also, like many other countries, and I'd say probably even worse for Australia, we do have a significant fragmented data situation. We have a lot of care management systems in an industry of 220,000 residents in assisted living. We have 13 different care management systems, or EMRs, that they use. And these aren't Epics, they're not Cerners or Oracle type systems. They're systems built by a nurse and a programmer. They probably have between $1 to $5 million in revenue, so they don't have big engineering teams. We are discussing about being fire ready and by next year, and I don't think a lot of them are going to make it. So part of our story is to help the industry get there and use InterSystems to really transform that data so that this ecosystem of healthcare can start to communicate and share information with the adjacent areas that they service. We also have a lack of a common data standard, like many others. New Zealand had a government that they did mandate a standard called InterSystems. Our head of interoperability, I think she's still in the building, but looking at one of our government agencies, CSRO, is here today, but they're working on this problem specifically. But also, it was great to hear today that InterSystems does have a OMOP data standard that we will be exploring to take a lot of our client's data and transform into a resident population data set so that we can also build products, we can explore new algorithms and AI, generative AI, but we can also open that up to other vendors, up to researchers, institutions, drug companies, whomever it may be to access. And the concept of that is called the Careverse. And so the Careverse is effectively our working of using the IRIS Health platform to then transform that data into a common standard so that then we can continue to advance healthcare within Australia. And one of the quotes I really loved about the situation we're in and the way our industry thinks, our industry does not like change. and definitely I quote this to my teams and their thinking, because we are individuals and creatures of habit. And so to really think outside the box is very important. And that's what Billy Beane taught me back in 2000 when he took a very different approach to baseball that at the time was a sport that's been around for many, many, many years. And it took until that period of time to then look at something very different. And I'm so astonished at how simple it was, but nobody else had done it. And wish they would have won the World Series, but to surely get a team with $35 million of salary cap to almost beat the Yankees with about $400 million is pretty impressive. So that's really where the story of the aged care market comes into life here. So before we wanted to change the game and start talking to a lot of our clients about the concept of AI, because we do have a very low technology adoption rate in our industry. Our average age of an RN is a 52-year-old female. And a lot of our RNs and clinicians are in the industry for personal reasons. They've had children with disabilities, they've looked after loved ones, they had a touching period that they wanted to give back in some way in a job and a role. So we have to be mindful of that. And also, the words AI, it scares them. They think of sci-fi movies, they think of Terminator, and so forth. So we also have to be mindful of how we introduce that into our organizations and businesses. But also with our government, we have a very tight regulations on ethics of AI already, and most of the country is just starting out on that. And certainly part of programs is we have to write ethic papers, present to ethic committees and their boards about what type of program we're doing and how the AI is working within it. And it's interesting to hear some of the advancements happening in the States, and definitely feels a lot more liberal in the thinking of how AI is being adopted. But we did poll a number of our clients. We do a lot of webinars every month to just continue to educate the sector, to talk about topics that they want to understand and to hear and to explore. And we bring different executives on to share their stories as well. And I do have a couple clients in the room. But one of the things that we wanted to explore before we started to really jump in and build more AI products that would be really market-facing, not something that we use behind the scenes that our clients don't know much about, is what was the likelihood that the industry was going to look at an AI project in the next 12 months. And I was quite overwhelmed that 80% said that they were likely to explore this. So from a market research background, that gave some good consideration. We're on the track that they want to do something here. We also want to understand what was their idea of how it would present an opportunity within the business. Did they think it could create some of the efficiencies around the mundane and manual tasks? And when I say manual tasks, we have a lot of regulation around how care needs to be documented and written down and charted. And if we miss a gap and an auditor from government comes on site and picks this up, it can be $1 million exercise for that provider to fix that issue and then demonstrate that it's not a systemic issue within a culture of the workforce or within the staff training or competency levels of the clinicians there. So again, over 75% did see that. So these are some of the markings that told us the industry is now ready for this as an Australian healthcare market. So off we went, and we started to explore some of the techniques that we really built in about 2010 with our system Medicare. And we realized to make AI work, though, we needed good clinical data to start to really power the algorithms, machine learning, the AI, and the generative AI that I'll share with you. Otherwise, the models will start to hallucinate. You just get pretty much rubbish back, and you just waste money throwing to the different large language models and paying them tokens to push information through to them. And so the technique that we had to go through and really come back to the beginning of our origins. We're in our 15th year as an organization in Australia, but we did start with that problem that providers had of getting information out of our antiquated old Medicare systems on old mainframes, and providers would effectively get these downloads of just unstructured data that came in CSV formats, and they would have to have analysts kind of restructure it manually to then make sense out of it. And that was just the beginning of how they managed their funding. And I saw that as an opportunity and effectively used a company called MicroStrategy at the time. They had a great mobile BI platform, and we built a data warehouse. We then built effectively ETL ingestion techniques because we couldn't hook up to Medicare. Nobody could hook to Medicare. There's no APIs. So we had to use screen scraping techniques to then move the data off of our clients' front-end access to Medicare, and then put it into a repository that we then structured, and then served it back up in various visualizations, depending on the personas that were looking at it. And that's effectively then the process we had to go back to the future on with the care management situation we have. Not all the systems even have an API in our industry. I think there's probably 2 that we can actually have a API that is well documented, and then it brings the information out of that ecosystem. And that's really where the cry for help was coming from in our sector, almost like a commercial vacuum saying, can you please fix this for us? You know, we want to get this data out of these ecosystems, these silos, at whatever costs. And that was great because we knew, well, we need to do that in order to run an AI, but we also need to make sure it's harmonized and standardized, and in a way that these models can then really interpret and grow. And that's really the second step that we have to go through. And that's where using some of the techniques with the IRIS platform to really harmonize that data that's sitting in private clouds of each of our clients, because the data privacy restrictions, similar to HIPAA, we need to ensure that those identifiable clinical records are stored 100% onshore, and we have all those security protocols around it. And then within those cloud instances, and with that structured data, then we can start the fun research projects, we call it, the fun development. And that's where generative AI is really quite impressive, and I'll explain some of the techniques that we're using. But the architecture that I noted, as you can see on the right side, or your left, is a representation of some of the care management systems. So if we open this up to home care as well, we have 43 care management systems now that we have to ingest from. And our goal is to work our way methodically through all of the different ecosystems and build those pipelines into the IRIS cloud. We're up to the 5th major care management system. Let's take it. And we have some home care providers also wanting to join on the bandwagon because they want to see that continuum of care journey as well. So the story doesn't end just with the residential aged care. The home care providers are also struggling with that, and a lot of them run in the same organizations, just in different divisions. But as you imagine, they're all siloed. They don't speak to each other. Even some of the teams don't even communicate, yet alone they're having a resident go through a journey from receiving home care services from an organization, and by the time that individual gets to their journey in an assisted living, it's starting over like you were at a new organization again. And that's part of the challenge of how interoperability is impacting us. From there, once the information is inside of the ecosystem, we then explore existing models around the world. We're using natural language models because clinical language is a written language, it's a common language, and the natural language processing is runs very well when you have structured data. But also in the concept of the Careverse, as we standardize this, as I noted, we can open up these models or open up these APIs to some of our clients. One of our first clients we started with, Illawarra Retirement Trust, we were exploring this, and they actually designed their own false prediction algorithm. And they were having the same problems of predicting false because of the unstructured data. So the potential of this as it evolves and snowball effect created, that's really what we're after. But also we can build our own unique products and services within this ecosystem. So the starting point for us, though, to prove this case in point to the industry was the funding process. Now, the funding process in aged care used to be assessed by the RNs on your own staff and within your own organizations. It was then audited by government nurses that would come around the country, evaluate your work, and if they didn't like a document or a T wasn't crossed, you would have thousands of dollars clawed back. And Andreas, I know, has been through those processes many, many times before. And effectively, the system is the same, but outsourced it to government contractors. So the process starts where the clinician and provider still needs to know the deterioration and what that resident represents compared to what Medicare is funding you. And from there, they then have to request a review. So I'm just dry in here. Do you have a cough drop? So when they request a review, it takes anywhere up to 5 to 30 days for a clinical team to come on site. And before they actually request a review, the industry spends probably about $500 million on clinicians just manually looking over records, assessments, to determine whether or not they feel there's a different classification within the 13 categories of care. And on the right there is effectively the steps that we targeted to augment with a generative AI model under a RAG AI technique. So the clinicians they search through, they read notes, they look at assessments, they look at the deterioration, they look past also a lot of the rubbish and inconsistencies that also gets put into the system, and they then have to synthesize that information. And these are some of the highest paid, most productive, most intelligent clinicians in our industry spending this much time. And the government thought the way to get around this was, let's not count that time in that direct care category of what the funding has to represent on that care time aspect. They then have to gather those insights and then determine a forecast and then effectively summarize that forecast so they're ready for the department auditor or official who would then assess that person and give you your funding classification. That brings us to the final step, which is the human in a loop process that we always keep. The provider then, it's still a voluntary claiming system, so providers may not actually request a classification. You're probably thinking, well, why wouldn't they? There's more money there. Well, if you don't have the roster to actually then support that, you may have other residents have been re-abled, so you're just trying to balance out that accountability. So there's a very complex sort of ecosystem happening with data, information, decision-making, rostering information, and all of it comes together and has to be synthesized and then acted upon. And that's effectively what we wanted to tackle as we thought it'd be a simple use case to start with, but a use case that we wanted the industry to do. And this is effectively the first prototype of how then the generative AI looks at all the information within a care management system. It then effectively summarizes and answers all of the questions with that department's algorithm. So the department has their own defined algorithm that the clinicians put their assessments into, and then it scores what classification they're at. So we've replicated that, and the AI is answering the questions, And then at the top there, let me just get a laser pointer here. There it is. These are actually references that refer to the exact point within the care management system of where the AI then inferred the information to answer that question. And then below, it writes effectively a summary, because some of the questions are not direct assessments. So one of the first questions is taken from an assessment tool called the DEMI, and it asks if the resident can bridge or not. And that's not a typical assessment in a care management system. So it's inferring from pain assessments, from progress notes, from falls risk assessments. And then we are evidence-based. So a lot of the thinkers, and also the Aged Care Act that is about ready to be republished, has clauses in it saying that if you are using AI, it's forward thinking in the governments already, we need to show traceability in any decision making that an AI or algorithm or machine learning is driving a clinician in their exploration of information. And we're deliberately not trying to get into the diagnosing or aiding decision support, because the Australian TGA government, they would see that as requiring like an FDA approval of software. So we, at the moment, are trying to stay below that and work more on the administrative side to tackle more of the administrative tasks within the efficiency gains that AI can bring to these homes that are obviously resource stretched. But then, now that we have the data out and we've proved some of these use cases, we started to take our clients on what we call research projects for better intensive purposes. And we did that because we wanted to help them safely, responsibly, and ethically explore the powers of AI, machine learning, and all of these aspects that the world is reading about. And especially in Australia, the US is like the big brother. We're always looking up to what's happening in North America, and we receive all the export and all the latest innovation, after fact, almost like when you hand down the clothes to your next sibling. And one of the purpose of the research journeys is so that we can use the industry to actually come up with the problems that they want to solve. Instead of having my team sit in rooms and think about, would it be nice to do this or do that? We go on the journey with them. But also, we're doing that deliberately so that these providers can also learn about the AI, the powers of it, and some of the innovation that is coming out of these projects is amazing. Then we have to put our attention to now, how do we then make that happen? How do we then train these models and work through it? And I'll touch on how we effectively do that. So some of the use cases, and what you're looking at up on the screen, is a use case at the bottom there, which is exploring fee-for-service approaches. So a private provider wanted to simulate resident futures based off of the clinical markings of their consumers. And we said, okay, let's think about how we can generate some future simulations of our residents. And we found actually a model in the States, Health Generation AI, and they have over like 170 million patient journeys mapped through this model. And we had to get the data structured into the format in which their model would actually accept. And what you're looking at there is effectively a 12-month prediction of a cohort of 140 residents in an assisted living home that will have markings of significant mobility deterioration in the next 12 months. And the population with the spike there is the population that we wanted to focus on, not only the resident, but the families as well. Going through this exact use case, I wanted to touch me so much. My father-in-law went through something very similar with Parkinson's, and so he had Parkinson's for about 10 years, diagnosed in his about mid-60s, and the prognosis and what you know about Parkinson's and the freezing, it's a bit hard to think about. Well, how do we prepare for a neurological condition? And as we learn more about it as a family, extra strength training, physio mobility were certainly aspects that benefited him. And so this provider came up with the concept saying, well, let's have a Parkinson's warrior group, and let's target these families so we can not only educate them about what's going to happen with mom or dad with this deteriorating condition, but how can we also help these families with their individuals so that they can better combat the deterioration of Parkinson's? And that's really where the research questions come around. It creates amazing discussions about data and information, and that's really what is so important. But when you do that with different personas, physios, lifestyle coordinators, the RNs, and mission individuals, they all bring different perspectives to that, and that's what we're trying to drive out of them. And effectively then what these will become are then individual products and services that we will then use to support our sector. But the concept of that careverse is then that ecosystem, which I've been amazed how many of these organizations already have data scientists. They already have PhD students now coming into their business, developing and playing around with algorithms. So we wanted to enable that and not have these organizations, I don't want to say waste, but burn a lot of money on trying to build their own data warehouse instances and toy around with AIs. Really, together as a small nation of 24 million people, we need to really be mindful of our resources and scale that. And that's really part of our mission, Mirus. So where this journey, though, is then going and how it's evolving, though, is as we started to then build out a clinical data standard, which we don't have one yet that's named. I wanted to ensure that we're not going to create the 80s VHS and beta video wars that go on for years, or the laser disc versus the DVD. We want to be aligned with government and what's happening there. So further collaboration continues to happen. There's 33 delegates have come over from Australia to the conference, which is big numbers from that side. We are ready for the change and ready for this, and effectively what InterSystems is doing and some of the roadmap and the products are coming ahead are quite amazing, and I think it's going to really change the face of healthcare, not only around the world, but definitely in Australia. But the other aspects that we're doing is looking at some of the mundane and manual tasks that these homes have to do due to reform. So one of them that they do is they also spend millions of dollars each year on clinical auditing. So clinical quality and ensuring how the clinicians across 60, 70 different homes within an organization are following policy, documenting the wounds and assessments the correct way. If it says second day dressing, you got to write that down every second day. If you miss 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, that's a gap. So these are all manual tasks that are done by the clinicians, and that's where we are now training other AIs and teaching them to think and infer like a quality officer. And our teams, they give them names because we're working in these sectors for so long. We have different individuals that we think about when we try to when we're training the AI models and say this is going to be Abby, and Abby's got to look for standard 2, which is one of the clinical standards across an organization. And just to give you a concept of how much this would cost the business to do an audit of maybe 5 residents of standard 2, you're probably looking to spend about $10,000 to $15,000 for a clinician to run that one audit. Abby can do that in seconds and then produce effectively the same type of insight and report out of the same information, but it's just done through the synthesis and collection. But you have to train Abby to think and infer the same way. So the knowledge of the industry to legislation is so important, and that continuous improvement of those models to make sure that they are getting that very specific use case down. And the way that we do that is we have clinicians both in Australia, but we also have an office in Belgrade, Serbia. And when we work with the Serbian Medical College, and we have a team of, I think 9 of the doctors and nurses, and they effectively train the models and look at how the responses of those different use cases are happening. And they did the same thing with the funding exercise that I noted, except that was a very different model where we actually were having to use 3 different large language models that would ask each other questions. So the first model was being asked the question of the department's algorithm, can Rob bridge? And then it looks across the information. And then the second model effectively then evaluates the response, and then our third model does a quality check across then the final outcome before it locks the question in. And while it's doing all of that, it is summarizing effectively its inference of the clinical information that's in the care management system. And so our goal as an organization is just to continue the evolution of that adoption, but safely and responsibly inside of our ecosystems and within the essentially guardrails, as many say. So at the moment, we don't allow any other of our clients or clinical teams or the industry to play with the models or to inform the models. I think everyone's heard some stories about some of the models. I think Google had one that started swearing at customers because they realized if you've started to ingest more profanity in it, then the model starts using profanity in its responses. So those are aspects that you do have to be mindful of because they are training. But as I noted, all this is happening on existing models. This isn't us building a model like NVIDIA or OpenAI. We're utilizing those existing models out there and training them to just be and think like a persona that you know to do an outcome and provide that output. So I'll take any questions if you have on a little bit of that journey. But like I said, I think with how fast this is moving, it's been certainly incredible. I think from looking back when we launched MicroStrategy with the first mobile BI, and at that point, BI was pretty okay, but once you put BI onto a new device at a time called an iPad, everyone was just blown away. And so there was that X factor that came out, and that worked really well. It also helped the IT adoption because people wanted to have the new flashy technology, the new shiny thing in their hands. Fast forward today, AI is what I'm seeing as that new shiny technology. And what we're finding with even the new grads that are coming into our clients' homes is they are expecting their organizations to have these tools available for them. Otherwise, they'll move on. They're used to using them in the workplace, in their schools, and we get into aged care, and you get a a clipboard and a piece of paper and a pen. And I think for a new 21-year-old or a 22-year-old starting off as a clinician, it's a little off-putting. And I think that's where we're also finding benefits for our clients is that the feedback's not even just in a business case of what's happening, it's also going right down to the staff culture, staff retention of these organizations. Questions? Yes. Do you want to talk to Mike or? Yeah. I think it's recorded. That's why it's.
That's fine. I'd say you made a couple of really good points that I just wanted to reiterate because we run into the same thing. Work for a healthcare company using AI. A lot of the work that we're doing is how do you stay below the threshold of a medical device, and even staying below the threshold of what's decision support compared to just providing somewhat of a recommendation. So there's clear definitions that have come out with the government, and if you cross over either one of those lines, it's a regulatory requirement and reporting requirement. It's a very, very big deal. So playing with the tools and coming up with ideas and delivering software is great, but making sure you have a team that's keeping you honest is key. And in our cabinet we have legal there, we have security, we have compliance to make sure you're staying within those boundaries. So you mentioned it kind of briefly about, hey, you got to stay below FDA. It's a big deal. I also thought just the example you gave was a really simple one. I actually stole a picture, I sent it to my team, is sometimes engineers over-architect and overcomplicate how to help the clinicians. I thought that was a great example of it. It doesn't take rocket science to give them help, so I thought that was cool. And the last point you made, it's something we've adopted as well, is creating personas. So you talked about having a name for it, and we've even found our users really appreciate that. It resonates a lot with them. So like for ours, our clinical persona, we have an avatar for it, it's called Belle. So she's Belle, and she always looks the same. The financial person, we named Benny for Benjamin, money. So each one of them has a name. Otto is our support one because it's automated. So Otto is kind of a play on auto. So Otto, but each one of them has a name, has a picture, has an avatar, and that's what people always see. And we never refer to it as AI. It's more Otto did this for you, or Belle is helping you with this, or whatever it may be. So I just thought those were really, really great points that we've kind of figured out over several years of trial and error when we started working with AI, a few years ago. So those little tidbits you threw out there were, I thought were really great nuggets of wisdom. I just figured I'd reiterate it for you.
Cheers, thank you. Yeah, our journey's been about 12 months now, so a couple of years on that front. But I agree with that. I think it, for the staff, our head of people, organizational psych, we've actually had at one point with 3 organizational psychologists in the business. So Brene Brown was everywhere and so forth. But we found that it gives that humanistic connection to technology. If we look back at IBM and what happened with them, we'll call it Watson. So it really stuck. But also, I think for the people that are working on this, they don't consider themselves technologists. I mean, these are clinicians, these are enrolled nurses, but they're playing a role in AI by training the model in the framework that we set up to say, is this a good response or not? And if not, how can we improve it? And they spend days and days, going over those types of responses. So, the pride that gives them too, because then they go, wow, I'm actually building technology. I'm changing the world. I'm doing something unique. And then you add, the name factor in. So it's, that's very, very on point. Comments from the CSRO. So the CSRO teams here, they're actually working on some of the interoperability challenges that we have within our sector. So we are going fire first as well as a country, and I believe we have 12 more months. I think there's some very specific hardline mandates that these businesses need to get there. Otherwise, if they need to communicate with a hospital, it's not going to happen. And so part of our plan too is a plan B, or which in some companies it's going to be plan A for them, to ensure that they can still communicate with the existing system, because as you think about the disruption, taking an EMR out of a business and trying to retrain 2,000 plus staff on how to use a new interface and where to put assessments and notes, very disruptive. Whereas the other strategy is, well, why don't we just help fill the void and the deficit of what that system can't do for the reasons that I noted before, so that they can still continue on, but keep their residents happy, their nurses happy, but comply with the new standards moving forward.
We're playing catch up, and we're trying to do that in the next 12 months. So hopefully learning from other people's journeys. But Mike, I'll also comment on what you said. I mean, this morning we were talking about that that certification requirement, and while that initial effort is to also sort of make sure the early work stays this side of the line, there's also a strong effort towards preparing for, even while we're doing this work, making sure it's being done along with that QMS thinking, with that quality management thinking on, so that as we build these tools and we sort of then go over the line, and a lot of our solutions are over the line as class. In Australia, we call them class 2B, 2C medical devices, very similar to this, to make sure that we've got, even in the developmental pipeline, all of those things ready to go for when, if we collaborate and build tools and other organizations put them on, that it's ready to, yes.
And the CSRO, they also develop tools that are used around the world. So SNOMED was built in your labs up in Brisbane, right? Onto Server. Onto Server was built, and there's also other natural language processing. But what the government does is, if you are a sovereign business, you get to use those tools for free. So that's quite good, because the first resident we ingested costed $30 to just extract out of a system, and then you then start to push it through another AI model, and then there's another $8. Now you start throwing tens and tens of thousands of residents a day through that. It really starts to add up, and so that's where we're continuing to look through the efficiency side of how we then approach this with different models, getting to the similar results, but bringing the cost down. And it is coming. It will come further with time, and the advancements and some of the models that are now showing up. We thought it used to just be ChatGPT 4 was the best one. Now there's many other ones that give the same results to us. So it is an evolution that is happening. So keep exploring.
I've got a question about the regulation, since it's very important to know the low threshold. Where do you see that going, and in terms of how is the government going to help the other side, which is the industry being crushed by more demands, more documentation, and at the same time, if we keep it so low, aren't we just selling a pill for a treatment, and then we're going to have to sell another pill for the complication and another complication, and keeping the industry on that low threshold, instead of maybe looking at regulation? And at the end of the day, we are going to have this new huge wave of consumers with different expectations, where privacy and information is different for them. They sign to memberships, they sign to social media, and they go and dump all their information. But then once they're in aged care, I've been a nurse on the floor, you need that information to take care of that person. And then if you're crushed by all this privacy, everyone's going to be so afraid to just enter that data, because what is going to happen after that? Where is the liability going to stop? So where do you see that regulation and liability going?
Oh, I don't think it's gonna stay there. It's gonna continue. I mean, I was the victim of identity theft with someone took my identity and changed my tax return and the bank account and tried to get the ATO just to pay $500,000 to an account that had no idea where it was going, and it would have been in my name. So I think, that's just one example. But when you get into healthcare side, but it will continue to evolve. I think it's going to be an evolution. But you're right; it's about understanding all of those frameworks, having and doing business with vendors that are ISO compliant is definitely a good start. So all those aspects, it's real. It's going to be happening, and I think.
So I think, and I'm not speaking on behalf of Mike, but the intention is not to avoid the regulation, but the intention is to understand where that line is. See, AI has a massive trust and adoption barrier to jump over, right? And if we can start small, you talked about cost of doing these things, and the barrier of overcoming with the software as a medical device regulation is much bigger, right? So if we stay on this side of the line, understanding the line was, I think, your point. Stay on this line, do the simpler bit around the operational decision making that Mirus is currently doing, and prove the technology. And then as we are doing that, learn the process, the regulation, and then go all in with the clinical decision support so I think that was the intention.